Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hey guys, Bud Elliott here with my summer school series on the Cover 3 College Football Podcast. Today we are talking Nebraska. A lot to talk about. Let's bring in Brian Christopherson of Husker 247. Brian, what's going on, man?
Oh, not a lot. We're hanging out here, getting ready for summer camp season now. So we move from one thing to the other, and people are optimistic, cautiously about the Rhule era here in Lincoln.
You know, I understandably, if Nebraska fans don't want to dive in with both feet and say, okay, like let's pump the brakes, because the last guy was seemingly from the outside and certainly at the time of the hire a perfect fit in Scott Frost. And a lot of things went wrong and it didn't work out, culminating in a 4-8 year last year, kind of fringe top 75-ish team in the power rating. So not a Colorado bottoming out necessarily, but certainly not up to the level of expectations that Nebraska fans have. What's been, I guess, the most encouraging thing that Rhule has done so far?
I think he's talked about more of a traditional style offense, which I think is appealing to folks here. It's not that you have to go back to 1990s option style Husker football all the way, but there's a sense that Nebraska's really lost something in the trenches on both sides of the ball. I mean, if you look at Husker like production in the draft of NFL draft with linemen, it hasn't been there lately. They haven't had all conference type players. And that used to be just something you expected in Lincoln. You expected a couple of guys who are first or second team, all Big 10, all Big 12, whatever it may be. And that's disappeared. So I think it starts up front, and there's a feeling that there is going to be a dedication, I think, toward sort of a ground game and getting that going. And starting up front. So that's what people are hopeful about. And I think they also hear a coach at least who talks a lot about the details and just these little items and sort of making them go over and, even they even practice their walkthrough on game day to the stadium during the spring game. Like, this is how it's supposed to be. We need to know how to do every step of this the right way. And so there's hope that sort of those little things are going to all add up to do a big change for a team that has been in close games, but just has been on the wrong end of a lot of them.
I mean, even if he's an average coach, their close game luck has to sort of even out eventually. You mentioned more of a traditional style run game. So let's start there on the offense, an offense that was top 75-ish last year, basically. Special teams was the real killer of that team at times. I don't talk a lot of recruiting in these, but because Rhule committed yesterday, do you worry that with how bad Spencer Rattler looked under coordinator Marcus Satterfield that Matt Rhule is going to have an issue with negative recruiting against the Satterfield hire when it comes to going after top quarterbacks?
Oh, I don't know about that. I mean, I think Matt Rhule has a lot of trust in Marcus Satterfield, and they go way back. And I think when it comes to recruiting any players for this program, Rhule and the staff is going to point to, look at what we did with guys at Temple. Look at what we did with guys at Baylor. Those were not easy jobs to take over. And some of those guys that are now in the NFL were like 2-star recruits. So I think they just point in that positive direction of, hey, we are a staff that has a history of developing people. And just go look in the NFL right now. It's littered with guys who played for this staff at Baylor and Temple. And so I think that's what you stress. And, Marcus Satterfield, I think, is really connected with Jeff Sims, who's a guy they're really excited about right now. And if Sims takes off and has a good year and can keep the turnovers down, and that looks very successful, I think then you can build off of that. So obviously there's a lot riding on, looking the part sort of in this first year. But I do think that this staff has enough in their background at Temple and Baylor where they can go back to it and say, we've built these programs and we've built up guys who sometimes the recruiting rankings didn't even recognize as much, but we saw talent there and we, developed them into really good players, and we can do the same thing for you.
His player development has really been off the charts everywhere he's gone as a head coach. I had to ask. I was surprised at the hire, just given how it looked at South Carolina last year, right? and that they wanted him gone. You mentioned Jeff Sims. I've been doing a lot of these summer schools, and I'm pretty encouraged that maybe Georgia Tech's roster last year was better than I realized, because there's a lot of schools out there that are very excited about the players that they got to transfer out of Georgia Tech this offseason. I assume you put Sims in that category, given that Casey Thompson did transfer out.
I mean, they believe Sims is a next level guy. They believe he has all the tools. You're talking about an elite 11 type quarterback. It is just about kind of knocking down that interception total somewhat. 6'4", 220 guy. He can run if you need him to, but that doesn't have to be the main weapon. He's as Rhule says, a passer first who just happens to have really good speed, and he can extend plays. I think he would have been tough to beat out if Casey Thompson had stuck here, just because even if you go back to early signing day in December, one of the first press conferences Matt Rhule did, he had watched every game Jeff Sims had played at Georgia Tech, because he's friends with Jeff Collins. He used to coach there. So he watched him very closely. And so they had a great scout on him. And there's 2 or 3 things, they saw they could change, sort of the inside baseball stuff with some of his footwork and things like that they thought could make a real difference. But they see a player who I think from the beginning they thought could be QB1, even though Casey at the time was still in the program. Now, they were going to let him compete, and that would have played itself out. But I think Sims would have been tough to beat, and probably Casey realized that.
I think it makes a lot of sense, and could be helped also with a quality run game. Is Anthony Grant, is he going to be a part of the team come fall? I know I'd seen some stuff. I figured I'd ask you here on the show. I mean, guy's really talented back when he's when his head's in the game and he's doing all right.
Yeah, he's in the mix. I mean, right now, Gabe Urban is a guy who's really jumped on the scene, who came out of the Buford program in Georgia. That's a powerhouse. And honestly, his first year on campus, he was going to be the starter, and then he suffered a tough injury early on in that season. So he's been kind of coming back from that, but this staff loves him. He's like a 220 plus pound back. They feel can be a battering ram. And when I talk about Nebraska being more traditional and what fans like about Rhule, one of the things is like he'll speak in sort of like with a specific number in mind, even like we need 75 plus rushing yards in the fourth quarter, to finish teams off. And when he talks about that, he speaks of a guy like Gabe Irvin. Ramir Johnson is another kind of veteran here who the last staff I felt like maybe misused last season, didn't get him the ball enough. He's going to be more a part of the equation. Anthony's certainly still in it, though. I mean, you need to go 3 or 4 deep anymore. Anthony Grant had a good year last year, 600 yards the first 5 games. When he got to the Big Ten, the knock on him was it wasn't as much north and south as it needed to be in this league. There was a little too much trying to go lateral and outrun people, and it just wasn't working. So that's the thing he's really going to have to prove. I think whoever wins that job, it's not necessarily going to be that guy who's the home run hitter who has that 55-yard play. It's a guy in this league especially who can turn a 2 or 3 yard gain into 4 or 5 and then do it again, and then you just have that constant drumbeat. So that's whoever that guy is, he's RB1.
They lose Trey Palmer. They lose Alante Brown. They lose Oliver Martin. But they bring in quite a few interesting pass-catching transfers. So Billy Kemp, Virginia, Josh Fleeks from Baylor, and Eric Gilbert. Are any of those guys standing out so far?
Yeah, Billy Kemp's going to be a huge part of it. I'd be surprised if he didn't lead this team in receptions. I mean, even if you look at his resume at Virginia, he's like one of those guys, 65, 70 catches a year type player. So he's going to be a high-volume guy. Eric Gilbert is anybody who follows recruiting knows what a freak talent athlete he could be. He's had a good off season here. I think kind of getting, invested in what the culture is and fitting in. He still has to get a waiver as of this moment when we're doing this. So we'll see if he gets that. They're hopeful that's going to happen so they can play because it's a second time transferring. But obviously if he does, I figure he'll be a central part of the offense at tight end. And then kind of interesting is Xavier Betts, was a former 4-star recruit out of Bellevue West here in Nebraska. He left the team prior to last fall, but came back under Rhule, and he could be kind of a wild card, one of those guys, like if he can kind of find his footing and take off from where he was, 2 years ago and take another step, he could be a big deal. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda is another name like that to know, who actually entered the portal during the middle of last fall and is now back. So, Rhule's giving guys like that another opportunity and says, hey, you didn't go into the portal on me. It's a fresh opportunity. Let's see what you got. And some of those guys, I think, are ready to take advantage of it.
I think that's awesome. So the offensive line, you lose Trent Hickson, Trent Hickson, you lose Bando. Hickson had decent numbers last year, not great. The rest of the line had pretty sketchy numbers.
Yeah.
Is there a reason to believe they're going to be better this year?
Well, they were definitely choppy is the nice word. I always use choppy, like uneven, but yeah, they were bad at times. They were. And here's the hope. Ben Scott is a transfer they brought in from Arizona State, has played a lot of football. So he's probably going to be the command center of that offense. Nordine Nuili is a guy they really liked, who was coming on 2 years ago, and then he had a suspension due to a failed drug test last year. He's back. So there's 40% that wasn't on that front five that's now there. Teddy Prohaska is a left tackle from the area that they think has next level talent. And, he was injured as well. So there were some of that injuries, and a couple of guys that just weren't in the program a season ago are available that now are. So can they make the big difference? I don't know. But I also think there's maybe a feeling that Donovan Raiola, who's a second year O-line coach, the only coach retained from Scott Frost's staff by Rhule, that he might excel with an offense that is maybe a little more traditional. And last year was very just pass happy and sort of take your shot, try to hit Trey Palmer on that big ball. It didn't feel like it just felt like it was sort of out of whack as far as a good run pass ratio. So we'll see if that helps that O-line too, if it's that more run oriented style maybe plays a benefit for them.
So switching over to the defense, which was rated slightly better than the offense last year, but not by a ton. I guess all units had their problems, which is not surprising when the coach gets fired. They have a decent number of losses in the front seven, mostly at D tackle and then some at outside backer, inside backer. Which of those losses are meaningful, and which losses do you feel like will be able to be replaced fairly easily?
Well, I give a lot of respect to a young player like Ernest Hausman, who went to Michigan. He was a good linebacker as a first year player. He's got a lot to prove still. He's a guy who kind of dipped his feet in the water last year at Nebraska. So we'll see what he does up in Ann Arbor, but certainly he's a decent loss. They have added some guys. They're going to play freshmen on the defensive line. That's pretty interesting. Like Princewell Unmanmielen, if I pronounced it right. He's down to Texas. He's a 4-star recruit, and he looked really good in the spring. He's going to play some snaps. So there's guys like that. Cameron Lenhart, who's from IMG Academy, first-year freshman, doesn't look like an 18-year-old. He's going to play this year. And so there's going to be opportunities for guys like that. And then there's interesting stuff that just happens with the first-year staff where, like, guys who weren't on the radar here previously suddenly are. Like John Bullock is a walk-on from Omaha Creighton Prep who's a junior. And we weren't talking at all about him. And suddenly the first week of spring, he's one of those guys where this staff's like, he's everywhere. And by the end of the spring, it's like he could be a starter, So that's sort of the fun stuff, I guess, that happens with the roster talk in that first year, where they really did open the door for everybody to put it on film. What do you got? We're not going to have preconceived notions necessarily about who's what based off of last year. And there's going to be opportunities for some young guys to grow. They'll probably take some lumps along the way, but they're going to get some snaps, and they're going to play a lot of guys on that defense. They're going to play 20-plus guys routinely, it sounds like.
I'm really excited to see how this goes. The front seven is probably the bigger concern than the back end, right? At linebacker, are we expecting significant snaps from Chief Borders or MJ Sherman?
Oh, I definitely think they'll fit in. MJ Sherman was out there at the starting unit at the end of spring. Obviously, the transfer from Georgia was around championship football, and just one of those guys that, you look at Georgia's program, it's just so loaded. There's guys who are third team there who think, hey, I can go somewhere and I can play. Like, it's time for me to show it. And so he's going to get that opportunity here in Lincoln and hopefully provide some presence off the edge as well. And Chief Borders, a transfer from Florida. looked like he was more with the second team at the end of spring. I don't know how much to read into that, but they're going to play a lot of guys. So I suspect he will also be heavily involved. They are on paper stronger on the back end, you would say. It's a group that looks good in the secondary with some of the returning parts and when you mesh them with the new parts. So I would agree with you that the question mark is more in that front 6 or 7. Although it's really interesting around here, we have all these narratives about certain position groups, and Rhule seems to often have an opinion to the contrary of what some of us think. So we'll see how that goes.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, with what top 6, top 7 guys returning in the secondary, at least by snap count, Rhule may not see the lineup the same way, right? Like, is there anybody who maybe is going to threaten for a starting job who didn't get to play much last year there in the secondary?
There's Omar Brown is a guy who played at Northern Iowa and had a really good career there. Actually, it had some All-America credentials while he was at Northern Iowa. So he was brought into Lincoln last year in the portal, and we thought he was kind of going to blow up, have a big season, and really was sort of in the background. It felt like early in spring he was getting momentum. So he's a senior that I could see being kind of a ball hawk, rover type player who Tony White, and we can get into Tony White's defense. I think there's a lot of guys in the secondary who are just excited about the opportunity there because it's a playmaking defense that's caused a lot of turnovers when he was at Syracuse. So there's guys on the back end who are pretty excited about that. And Omar Brown's a veteran guy. And as far as college football goes, who I think knows how to improvise pretty well. And so he would be a guy that maybe we didn't see as much last year, who's more on the scene.
Awesome. Is Billy Kemp a punt returner option for this team?
Yes, he could be. He's definitely getting among the guys getting looks there. I wouldn't be surprised if he leads the way. And I think they're going to be an aggressive coaching staff with the special teams. I mean, I think they're going to be a group that takes chances, and they're going to go after kicks, and they want to set a tone that way and be that sort of have that aggressive mindset and just, convince that your team, like, this is how we're going to be. We're going to attack. And once in a while, things aren't going to work out when we take some chances, but, roll with it. If we go in knowing that we're going to be this type of team and have that type of mindset and everybody's on board with it, you can adjust. And it doesn't mean because you mess up and give a team a short field, you have to let them go 45 yards and score a touchdown either. So I think that's going to be an interesting part as a special teams. Just like I do feel like there could be more of an attacking nature there.
Absolutely. So where on this squad, other than quarterback, is the biggest gap between the starters and the backups? In the position where you're like, all right, they have got to stay healthy here because these backups just can't play at the level that's going to allow them to get to their goals.
Beyond the top 6 guys or so on the offensive line, I think they have potential that's a year or so away. They've got a lot of incoming freshmen, but I just don't know what's there yet. And sometimes you find that there is something that a guy rises up and it's like, oh, he had more than I knew of at this time. But O-line would be a spot where, like, Ben Scott needs to stay healthy, I feel like. And, Nuri Illy, who I brought up, who was suspended last year, like, a guy like that needs to be out there for the entirety of the season because I'm not sure about, like, who the 8th and 9th guy necessarily are on that O-line rotation. So that would be a place I would start. Wide receiver, I would also say right now is a question mark to me until proven otherwise. I think Rhule's optimistic about what they're going to be, but they're going to need some first-year freshmen maybe to step up there. And that's why I think it's going to be kind of an entertaining team to watch because we're really not used to in Nebraska young players playing as much. It feels like when they get here, they're kind of behind a curtain for a year or two. It's like, we'll see what they're like as, third-year sophomores or whatever. I think in this case, we're going to see 5, 6, 7, 8 guys, who just got here just out of high school who are going to play some snaps. And so that's going to be, I think, an interesting dynamic and a little bit different than what it's been around here.
Awesome. Brian, thanks so much, guys. You need to check out Husker 24/7. It is the site to go to for all your Cornhusker stuff. Have to have you on again, man.
All right. Thanks for having me.